So on behalf of both organizations, we welcome you here tonight. Before we begin, we would like to thank our sponsors for this evening, Suncoast Credit Union, and Ms. Vicki Lovett is going to say a few words.
Good evening. Thank you so much. We're so pleased to be here. My name is Vicki Lovett. I'm the Chief Lending Officer at Suncoast Credit Union, and we so very much value our relationship with HCC. They just bring so much to our community. We serve students, we serve all of the school districts, and we really appreciate the ability to also work directly with HCC. So congratulations on 50 years. We're so excited about that. And we appreciate you being here, and we appreciate our partnership so very much. So thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to now introduce you to our moderator for this evening, Rodney Kite Powell. Rodney is the director of the Touchton Map Library here at the Tampa Bay History Center. He's a published author, has written extensively on the history of Tampa and Hillsborough County, and is the editor of Tampa Bay History, a regional journal published through a partnership between the History Center and the University of South Florida Libraries. He has also served as an adjunct professor at both the University of Tampa and the University of South Florida, teaching courses on, of course, the history of Florida. Rodney received a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Florida and a Master of Arts from the University of South Florida, both in American history. On behalf of HCC, I want to thank Rodney for serving as our moderator for tonight's panel. Please join me in welcoming
Thank you so much, and thank you all so much for coming out this evening. So, we have an incredible panel for you all today. And so what we're going to do is first we will ask all five of our panelists, and so from your right to left, Judge E.J. Salsinas, Ron Weaver, Terrell Sessoms, Michael Sparkman, and Dr. Hernandez Fox. We're going to ask each one to give just a couple minutes of a description of who they are and really kind of why they are participating on this panel. And then we will ask each one of them a question about the growth and development, not only of Hillsborough Community College, but how that growth and development has mirrored the growth of Tampa and Hillsborough County over the past 50 years. And so the first 2 minutes, though, for our panelists, we'll start with Judge Salsinas. So EJ, tell us a little bit about yourself, but really, why are you part of our panel?
Well, I'm a native of Tampa. I've seen the area where HCC is currently located on the corner of Tampa Bay Boulevard and Dale Mabry. I've seen all of that area developed. As a little boy, I worked in my father's general store, and there were a lot of dairies all in that area that was outside the city of Tampa. So you were in the county when you went west of Lincoln Avenue, and there were a lot of dairies, and among the products that my father sold, we sold the high-top rubber boots that are normally identified with dairies as they clean where they're milking the cows, etc. So I remember distinctly, immediately after the Second World War, going in my bicycle with a couple of pair of boots, rubber boots, dangling from my neck, and go on my bicycle into that area of Tampa Bay Boulevard and deliver the boots to the different dairies that had called. As the Second World War ended, that area started getting populated. There was a lot of cheap land that had been either leased or owned by the county or the city or even the federal government. And now there were abandoned barracks there were gymnasiums, there were other facilities that had been left by the large contingency of military that were in an area that we used to call Drew Airfield. Remember that Tampa has two big airfields during the Second World War. One is Drew, which is where HCC is now located on the Dale Mabry campus, and we had MacDill. Both of them started developing just before Pearl Harbor. But they needed a road to take all of the heavy equipment between these two military reservations. So there was a street that I remember as a little boy called Vera. Vera is now Dale Mabry. It is one of the best constructed highways in the state of Florida because it was intended for heavy machinery, heavy motors, tanks going from one military reservation to the other. So Dale Mabry was not known as such before the Second World War. It is 1943 when it got completed, and it is a very sturdy, very well-constructed highway. So I have seen how it started developing after the war. I have been invited many times to lecture at the Dale Mabry campus and some of the other campuses. So I think that's why they called me and said, EJ, can you give us some insight into how it really got started?
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We'll hear a little more of the kind of pre-HCC story from EJ in just a little bit. So Ron, what brought you to our panel?
On September 27, 1968, Dr. Graham, the first president of the Hillsborough Community College, sent out a flyer for September 27, 1968, orientation of 1,625 students. The next Monday afternoon, after the Hillsborough High classes adjourned the regular Hillsborough High classes, they would begin 1,625 students on September 30, 1968. But I love the flyer that Dr. Graham handed out at training on September 27th, the Friday before. And in it, he described in 4 pages all about the Hillsborough Community College and its offerings and its courses and its schedules and its faculty, its exciting faculty. It had about 17 faculty, 6 administrators, 1,625 students, as I mentioned. But my favorite part of it is on page 3, where he said, this is not just a new school. This is to be a place of innovation and of adventure. Don't you love making learning and adventure? And when I served on the board of St. Joseph, while I'm here, Rodney, St. Joseph's Hospital Board of Directors, I was chairing the Finance Committee. We were having a terrible time finding nurses and looking all over the world and importing some from the Philippines and paying their way because it was so hard to find. And we partnered with HCC. And for hundreds of times, HCC has stepped to the plate and helped those like Lifesavers for Life Saving at St. Joseph's Hospital's nursing program, the applied sciences, the associate degrees. We're national champions academically. We're national champions, in fact, in 1988 in baseball. And in 2008, we were national champions in tennis. I'm here for national champions of innovation and adventure.
Fantastic.
Good.
So, Mr. Sessoms.
What was the legislative process that led to HCC? As the population of Florida began to explode after World War II, education officials began to pay attention to this growth. And the old Board of Control, which is now known as the Board of Governors, asked a professor in higher education at Florida State University to sort of do a demographic survey and forecast the needs for expansion of the state university system. And those efforts ultimately led to the authorization for the University of South Florida in 1956. About the same time, Dr. James L. Wattenberger, who's considered to be the father of the community college system, arrived on the scene. He was a graduate of the University of Florida, and he earned his doctoral dissertation in 1950. And it was on the subject of Florida's need for junior colleges to put education where it would be accessible to Florida's growing population. And it called for the creation of a system of some 28 community colleges. Later, I served as a member of the legislature and was on the Higher Education Appropriations Committee looking at the budget request, and I noticed that one item was to appropriate the money for the completion of construction of the first phase of Valencia Junior College in the Orlando area. It was the 27th of 28, and I inquired and discovered that 28th was to be in Hillsborough County. And I thought we'd been preoccupied by all of our efforts to develop USF, but we also needed a community college to further extend access. So with the help of my colleagues in our Hillsborough delegation, I persuaded the Appropriations Committee, I can't remember the exact year, I think it was probably in the late 60s or maybe early 60s, to authorize the establishment of a junior college in Hillsborough County and to appropriate the first planning money. So the rest took off. We didn't concern ourselves with the exact location with a lot of the details, but we got the ball rolling.
Fantastic. And we'll follow up with that process in just a bit. So, Mr. Sparkman, what brought you here?
Yes, sir. I just do have to comment at this time, you know, as I grew up as a young man, I knew of Terrell Sessom, Speaker of the House, and for what he has done for the community college throughout the state, but most importantly, Hillsborough County, I think we owe him a round of applause. Bravo!
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate you so much. It's outstanding. I represent Hillsborough County HCC Plant City. And in that capacity, I was appointed by then Governor Lawton Childs in 1991 to the District Board of Trustees. In 93 and 94, I was chairman of the Board of Trustees and really got to see and get input on what was going on in the college. And I really enjoyed it. I had some wonderful people that served with me on the Board of Trustees. As I went back to Plant City as mayor and commissioner for 28 years, I always had HCC in my heart. And I was very instrumental in getting the Trinkle Center built in Plant City, very instrumental in our local fundraiser capital campaign committee to put the equipment in it and to put everything together that we needed done. And so that's quite an accomplishment. I have been a speaker as mayor on numerous occasions to students at the campus, and we use every chance we have to encourage and get the activities. And I'd like to maybe go in some more of that detail later. Little history about myself. I am the 5th generation Sparkman family here in town. Of course, my grandkids are 7th, so we have a real impact. I'm so proud of the heritage of my Congressman Stephen Sparkman. And you know, for years I was kind of cocky and saying I'm the only Sparkman that has ever been mayor in Hillsborough County. You know, but Charlie Spicola over here in Tampa kind of killed that, because he sent a book here from the Tampa History Center outlining all the mayors that city of Tampa had. Well, bless Pat, my first cousin, 3rd time removed, George Baskin Sparkman, was the first mayor of the new city of Tampa when West Tampa and the city of Tampa became incorporated as one city. He was the first mayor in according to the book, 1885. So that kind of busted my bubble, but I'm so proud of him, and I'm proud, and I've enjoyed my career in supporting government, local government, and the community and our education process. Thank you, Mrs. President.
Thank you. And again, we'll talk more about the Plant City campus of HCC in just a bit. Leon, what brought you here?
Well, it's time to plug the Ybor City campus. That was my academic home for 36 years, 3 years as an adjunct professor and 33 years as a full-time professor. and I am the 4th generation of my family to live in Hillsborough County. My husband, Bob, is also 4th generation. So looking at me, you're looking at Tampa, and you're looking at HCC as well, because all these years in my gray hair that I color, I earned them by living my life very happily in this area and finding an academic home at Hillsborough Community College. Our sons don't live here. One lives in Jupiter and the other one in San Francisco. So I wish I could say that the 5th and 6th generation are here, but they are not. Hopefully they'll come back. What I love about the history of HCC, and we're going to get into that in just a minute, is that it has provided such tremendous opportunities to so many people, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes, who might not have had the opportunity to get a higher education. My grandparents had little to no education. My parents managed to graduate from high school, and they were determined that we were going to go to college. So the grandmother on one side who went to 6th grade, and that was all, she has 5 grandchildren. I'm one. My brother was a county administrator in the state of Florida for 5 counties throughout his career. My youngest brother is an aerospace engineer. My cousin, Mary Teresa, is the vice president of academic affairs at St. Leo University, and her brother is a Jungian psychologist. This happened in 2 generations because of public education.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So now we'll start with the questions. We'll go back to Judge Salcinas, and you touched on this a bit in your introduction, but speaking about, actually we can talk about a couple campuses, but speaking about the main HCC campus, the Dale Mabry campus, you spoke about how out in the county and really out in the country it was. So if you could describe it, and just we'll throw in, because of Leon's mention of the Ybor campus, we'll throw in that one as well. Can you tell us about, prior to the existence of the HCC campus on Dale Mabry and the Ybor City campus, what were those 2 places like?
Well, you had immigrant communities in Ybor City and West Tampa, and as a result, it was the cigar industry that was the main engine of the economy in Ybor City and West Tampa. Just to give you an idea how important the cigar industry was early on in Tampa's history, they were producing 1 million cigars a day. That's 365 million cigars a year.
By hand.
And you put them in a box, and the box all say made in Tampa. So the cigar boxes traveled all over the country and really put Tampa on the map. But that area of West Tampa was not really developed. The cigar factories were primarily located in the center city of West Tampa and Ybor City. But there was a gentleman that was very close to Hugh Campbell McFarland by the name of Drew. John Drew was a contractor, I believe from Tennessee, had moved to Clearwater when Clearwater was all part of Hillsborough County. Because remember, West Hillsborough County existed until 1912, when the legislature created a new county from West Hillsborough County called Pinellas County. But once you left that West Tampa population on Lincoln, what you had was the country, it was the county, there was hardly no population, and Mr. Drew, the contractor who was building the many little houses for the cigar makers in Ybor City, you have a section called Las Casitas, the little houses. Well, they needed housing for the workers of the cigar factories. At one point, we had 300 cigar factories in the greater Tampa area, producing all of those cigars. but they needed quarters to live and raise their family, and Mr. Drew was the contractor, and he made money building the homes for the cigar factory workers, and he would invest his money in land, and he would buy more land, and he would buy more land. And you look at the maps of Tampa, and you see Drew subdivision, Drew addition, and in that area we had Drew Park. And something new was becoming very interesting, called aviation. Mr. Drew was interested in aviation, and he convinced a friend of his by the name of McMullen, Captain McMullen, to open up a small aviation school in a crude type of airport, and will charge 50 cents for the public to come on the weekends to see planes landing, etc. Where were they landing? Well, there were no cement runways. They were landing on the land, so the land had to be cleared so that those few planes that existed could land, and people were fascinated by these machines that flew. That was starting even before Tony Jannus flew from St. Pete over to Tampa in 1914. So as early as 1911, we were already having air shows. That little airport developed, and it became called Drew Field. With time, as the drums of war, the Second World War, are starting to be heard, Drew Field becomes more and more important, and then the federal government acquires, I think it was, what was the tail end of the peninsula called? Was it?
Oh, Catfish Point.
Catfish.
Point. Mhm.
Catfish, and that's where we now call MacDill. So as the war is coming along, these two airfields are now starting to develop. Remember, there was no Air Force. They were all part of the Army. So it was the Army Air Corps. The Air Force is not created until after the Second World War is over. So that facility is there, and that was also where, when the crash, the economic crash occurred, the Federal Reserve needed to send millions of dollars for the banks in Tampa, and the plane came from Jacksonville with $3 or $4 million, I don't recall exactly, and there was the postmistress. We had a female who was in charge of the post offices to greet that plane that was bringing in the millions of dollars, because the banks in Tampa were closed and they needed money. And where did that plane with the money land? In Drew Field. As Drew Field starts to develop, a senator from Missouri comes to visit in Tampa by the name of Harry Truman. And he visits at MacDill, and he visits at Drew Field. And who is entertaining troops there? Bob Hope. So Drew Field is a very significant location, not just for HCC, but that's where Tampa International Airport starts to develop. I told you that as a child, my father had a department store, and I used to deliver merchandise in that area. It is also the place where my parents would take me to Havana, Cuba, going straight down Tampa Bay Boulevard, passing Dale Mabry, passing Lois, and going to the corner of West Shore and Tampa Bay Boulevard, a wooden building which we called Tampa International Airport. And we used to fly on national airlines, DC-6s, and in 45 minutes you would be in a major capital called Havana, Cuba. So it's from there that our international airport starts developing, and there are some of you that are here that when the Tampa International Airport had moved to Columbus Drive, and we got the fantastic new airport that we have, that facility was used as a classroom for HCC. So some of you attended HCC at the Columbus Drive campus before you had the modern HCC buildings on the corner of Dale Mabry and Tampa Bay. And you might say, well, EJ, if Vera was the street that is now Dale Mabry, where does Lois get its name? Very interesting that Lois and Superman, in the Superman serial, you had Lois and you had Kent, who was the Superman. Well, they named that street for Superman's sidekick, Lois. That's how we got Lois.
Seriously. He's joking, right?
And I told you about dairies. HCC now has some housing on the corner of Lois and Dale Mabry. That was another major dairy, and that was Borden's Dairy, was there after the Second World War. In fact, they moved there right after the Korean War, but that also has a long history of dairies in that area.
Very good, except for the whole Lois and Clark thing. So, but seriously, thank you for kind of setting up the stage, because as we rehearse this, we'll talk about what comes after World War II. Florida and Tampa grew considerably after World War II. So many returning GIs, so many people who had come here, as EJ mentioned, these air bases that were here, trained tens of thousands of airmen and all the support staff, men and women. So Tampa and Florida were introduced to a whole generation of people, and so many of them moved here. And so that put a burden on the small university system and private university system that existed at the time. Prior to 1947, you had the all-male University of Florida, the all-female Florida State College for Women in Tallahassee, and then you had University of Tampa, University of Miami as private schools, and not a whole lot else. And so it's at this point, in the 1950s and 60s, where we'll have Ron pick up the story.
Thank you, Rodney, and thank you, EJ. One segue, in 1911, when we had our first air show, it was before Drew Field, so it was at Benjamin Field. And Benjamin Field was along Howard and Armenia, near where we have the Jewish Community Center now. And there were 12,000 people showed up. And we'll get to the growth of the community momentarily. But in 1911, 12,000 people showed up for the air show. It was the thing that everyone had to go to, like the Gasparilla Parade is now. And there was only one small problem. The two pilots were called McCurdy and Beachy, B-E-A-C-H-Y. And McCurdy and Beachy had the distinction of flying bravely into the sky and dodging all obstacles about 2,000 feet tall and landing safely, and then being promptly arrested by the Tampa police for charging for the air show, which violated the blue laws that you could not charge on Sunday for anything, including entertainment. So Beachy and McCurdy were brave in the skies, but the Tampa police arrested them in front of all 12,000 shocked fans as soon as they landed, because of the violation of the blue law that you couldn't sell anything, including tickets to an air show, on a Sunday in Tampa, Florida in 1911. But let's fast forward back to our pilot who landed with that $1 million. On July 27, 1926, the banks failed, and two of the banks, Citizens and one other, did not have a pilot like Loren Young, Y-O-N-G-E, who was the pilot of that plane that EJ described. So those two banks both failed, including Citizens Bank, in the crazy bank failure of July 26, 1927. The other three banks were palled together from their days in Jacksonville, where they get started with Tolliver and the other members of the banking community were old Jacksonville guys. Their buds back at the Federal Reserve in Jacksonville put the $1 million on Lauren Young's plane, flew it just like the judge just said into the First National Bank's needs. And here's what they did with the money. They pulled it out of the plane, took it down to the bank, put it on the back row behind the tellers and said, "It's all here, do you want it?" And most of the folks in the long line went, "Well, if it's there, I don't need to take it out and put it under my mattress." So those three banks, including First National Bank, succeeded because of Lauren Young's flight of that $1 million from Jacksonville from the Federal Reserve, where the First National Bank people had been with their buds at the Federal Reserve in Jacksonville, and they just put the money on the back counter. And they went back a few days later to Jacksonville. They just showed them the money, and the people quit running on the bank. Now, the 1960s has a different builder than John Drew. John Drew was a great builder, aviator, farmer, father of our campus site of the Tampa International Airport and HCC Dale Mabry. But my answer to your question, Rodney, is there was another builder. His name was Al Austin. He came out of the Coast Guard in 1954, and he asked his father, and thank you for delivering boots for your father, Judge. His father, R.S. Austin, was asked by this 1954 bright, fresh Coast Guard graduate named Al Austin, "What should I do, Dad?" And he thought for a minute, Rodney, about your question and said, "How about construction, son?" So Al Austin built $35,000 homes, which was twice anybody else's, but they were good, on Davis Island. Then he built an office building on West Kennedy, almost to what West Shore is now, and it worked. Then he built one on Henderson, and it was the Henderson building. It was the Al Austin building on Henderson. And then he bought 17.5 acres on West Shore Boulevard, which is just north of the interstate. Then the interstate came, and then in 1957, Britton Plaza came, and then in 1965, West Shore Mall came, and then the interstate came right through this area. And in 1960, Howard Franklin, a member of the road board, had done something nobody believed, which was a bridge to nowhere. Nobody will use a bridge to St. Petersburg. So in 1960, with $6.5 million, the road board, put up to it by Howard Franklin, bravely built the bridge to nowhere, which now houses hundreds of thousands of nobodies every day on the Howard Franklin Bridge. And there is where we began to grow. Phosphate took off. Citrus was still in fashion before some of the freezes. We had Metropolitan Life brought 1,000 employees in 1968. USAA would soon follow, and soon we were a major southeastern city. How major, Rodney? And I'll close with this. In 1950, the cover of Time magazine said, "The future of the South. Will it be Atlanta or will it be Tampa?" Carol.
May I add something, Rodney?
Oh, go right ahead.
In 1930, the population of the entire state of Florida was about the same as the current population of Hillsborough County. We have seen tremendous population growth. In 1926, as been mentioned, the Depression started in Florida with the collapse of the land boom by July. Most of the banks in Florida failed. There wasn't any FDIC. Many families had their savings wiped out. The big depression didn't start until a couple of years later, and when Wall Street crashed, and it affected the nation, but Florida got hit first. But after World War II, we began to have a resurgence in population growth. You know, today the state of Florida has moved past New York as the third most populous state. During my service on the Florida Board of Regents, we used the University of Florida's Bureau of Population Studies that does the work for the census and for the state to project population growth and trends in Florida so we could forecast capital construction needs. Much of it had been done even earlier by Dr. Wagenberger to forecast the need for a community college system. Well, they sort of shocked me, and this was back in the late 80s. The out-of-state group we brought in said, the population of Florida will not stabilize till near the end of this century, and barring some catastrophe, it'll be between 45 and 50 million people. And as I look at the U.S. Census population projections, every decennial census for the last 3 decennial censuses, we've been gaining about 2 million a year over 10 years on Texas. So the population growth in Florida has been really astronomical. Now, for the community colleges, some of them got started early. They were started by local school boards. You had one in St. Petersburg Junior College, one was started in Jacksonville, one in Palm Beach. There weren't too many of them. One was started in Tampa at Hillsborough High School in the weekends and evenings. Later, when they were able to acquire the plant hotel properties from the city of Tampa under a lease, it morphed from a junior college to a full 4-year university. And that void was filled later when HCC was authorized. Later, during a period of trying to rein in runaway property taxes, local school boards were spending up to free meals to support community colleges in their areas. We shifted that burden, relieved it from the districts, and shifted it to the state so that local school districts, local communities are not directly involved in funding community colleges unless something's come unglued in recent years. But we're going to have continued growth, and I'm not going to live to see it all. It's already sort of impressive. I know that EJ, Ron, all of you who've grown up here, lived a few years, can witness to it, but HCC has got big needs to fill, and it fills a real void. I mentioned before one of my sons graduated from the University of Florida with a degree in economics. After trying his hand in business for a few years, he decided the future was in healthcare. So he went to HCC and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing. Since he already had a college degree, a 4-year degree, he was permitted to take the Florida Board of Nursing exam, which he passed, and became a registered nurse. Today, he's a director of nursing for a healthcare company. So Hillsborough Community College provides an avenue for many people, some who may never have gone to college or into any trade. They're nursing, there's a variety of skills that you can acquire at HCC without going on to a full 4-year degree, or you can do the others. So it's been a tremendous asset for our community.
Well said.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So we talked a lot about Tampa, and so now it's Plant City's turn. So one thing that people might find interesting, or was a kind of fact they didn't know, is that basically the HCC of Tampa and the HCC of Plant City started about the same time. The campuses are about the same age in that sense. So Mike, can you tell us about Plant City in the late 1960s and how HCC Plant City got it started?
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you very much. These gentlemen up here are hard acts to follow, so I'm just going to put that out right out front. But I enjoyed the conversations with him, and I also enjoy every time I go to a seminar or something that EJ's speaking. If you haven't ever had the opportunity to do that, you need to do that. It's
Thank you very much.
Amen.
Very rewarding. Plant City, as he said, indicated, we had a group of businessmen. We had bankers, editor, our local Plant City Courier, and in the Chamber of Commerce, and everyone came together. The Moody family came together to make it form a committee through the chamber to promote HCC coming to Plant City. They came to all the planning meetings, and they came in force, and they came determined to do that. We got Richard Dick Elston became a member of the Board of Trustees, and then became chairman of the Board of Trustees. Was very beneficial for Plant City to be able to acquire this. We started classes on October 1968 in the Plant City Senior High School. And then from then, a few years later, we actually had in Plant City the 3rd public store, and it was built right downtown Plant City. And then later they moved to another facility a little further south and built their premier type store at that era. And so it came along that this time in their career, they were going to build a new store even further south in a full-fledged shopping center. The city of Plant City purchased that, and they renovated it to become the first campus for HCC College. They were in that facility for some few years. The city of Plant City stepped forward because the state school system was said, we need 80 acres. Plant City and the community and the government stepped up and donated 80 acres of prime property next to our recreation park for the college. And so with all that, it became a reality. The campus was built, and the college got off the ground. And the community is always supported. Every time I said a speech as mayor of Plant City, I always ended the speech with the fact that Plant City is a community and not just another city. Our roots there are deep, just like my roots with my family are deep. And people come together. We look after each other, and we have always, my forefathers before me, the recreation department and everything for the youth in Plant City exceeded all expectations with our Mike Sansone Park, original park. And there's a saying, it all begins in the park. Well, Plant City is a prime example of that because we have really showed our young people what we think of them and trying to support them, and HCC was it. Of course, HCC means so much to us. Now, as we indicated, our fire rescue personnel will be able to train through HCC. Our police academy can be trained through HCC, and many, many more. Plant City campus is only the one campus throughout the HCC chain that has the University of Florida on campus. You can attend the University of Florida on our campus. And it started out just as agricultural, but now you can have more than agricultural degrees. You can get a 4-year college education from the University of Florida on the Plant City campus. You'll get the same diploma as if you walked across the stage in Gainesville. So we're very, very, very much proud of that. And to show the kind of support, last year they needed funding for that college, Florida College there. And the Florida Strawberry Growers Association and the Florida Strawberry Festival stepped up to the plate. And I'm on the board of directors for the Strawberry Festival. We donated $75,000, which was matched by the Florida Growers Association, $150,000 to beef up and encourage and promote that college campus over there with the partnership between University of Florida. So Plant City is a unique place. Plant City they come to the table to work and do for what's right in the community. I was thinking about, we're talking about a little other history too in my family. My grandfather was the first tax assessor in Hillsborough County. In fact, he really was for a period of time in the legislature. And then he served as a county commissioner for a number of years for Hillsborough County. But in those days, we don't have these 400 horsepower cars. All he had was a 1 horsepower. And he would have to get up 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to get to county courthouse for the meetings the following morning when they started roughly at 9 o'clock. But he left that position and went to the tax assessor. He used to ride on horseback collecting taxes. There was no property assessment. It was all one office. And doing that, he would go as far as St. Petersburg, which Pinellas County, as E.J. alluded to, didn't exist. He would ride on horseback, and he would bed down at that with his saddlebags with the money that he had collected as his pillow and bring it back into Hillsborough County. His son followed him. William Bill Sparkman followed him in that capacity until he retired in the 60s. My cousin, Bob Walden, came in. My grandmother was a Walden, and he was the tax assessor until, the 70s. So there's a lot of history that I'm proud to be a part of and heritage, and I try to teach this to my grandkids and let them know what. And the most colorful cousin that I always think about is Lamar Sparkman. He was the cartoonist for the sports.
Yes.
And
Nationally
he always
recognized.
had the cartoon in the Tribune, and he actually designed the first Buccaneer logo. The orange helmet and those kind of things. So, you know, but Plant City is a community, as I said and indicated, and we have fundraisers. We can raise money for the right causes. People come together to do what's right for Plant City. So we're proud to be a part of HCC. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Leon.
Yes.
What
is left to tell?
Well, what's left to tell is really kind of the inside story. You have the experience that of being on campus day to day, and so kind of a two-part question for you, because you also have a different perspective as well. So, what role? What need did the founding and the creation of HCC fill in the community, particularly with the Hispanic community here in Tampa? And how has HCC changed through the years? You've already heard a little bit of that through the offerings and how the different partnerships and the workforce initiatives that HCC has. But from your perspective, what was the need and how has it changed?
Wow, those are both huge questions, and we could probably have a whole seminar with about 20 other people up here to help me to tell that story. But it's a very important story to be told, and I'll start with the first one that you asked me about, the impact in the Latin community. And some of you have heard me say this before, but in those of us who are my age now, graduated from high school in the 60s. And we were the second and third generations of the immigrants that came to this country to work in the cigar factories. And I'm half Sicilian and half Cuban. So my Sicilian half of my family, some of them worked in the cigar factories, but many of them started produce companies. So I'm going to brag on my family, the Valentes.
Yes, sir.
You couldn't eat a tomato in Hillsborough County that didn't come out of one of our warehouses. So we're very proud of that heritage as well. But what I'm trying to tell you is how close-knit these families were, the Sicilian, and I'm only going to speak from my perspective because that's what I knew. I thought every household was just like mine because all my girlfriends were half Sicilian and half Cuban. I'm not kidding. So it was just very normal to me. So our fathers were very strict, as you can imagine. Latin fathers wanted the world for their sons, but their daughters, they protected like you wouldn't believe. You can ask my husband. I had a 12 o'clock curfew the night of my rehearsal dinner, so it was he's a very patient man. So for the girls, there was no entertaining the idea of going out of town for college. You were not going. When I mentioned St. Mary's Dominican in New Orleans, I thought my father was going to have a heart attack. There was no way I was going to New Orleans for college. So at that time, the University of South Florida was built, and many of us went to that university and started our careers, and some of us never got out of college, kept getting degrees after degrees, but that was in '64 when I graduated, and as you know now, '68 is when Hillsborough Community College opened. So had it been opened then, I think we very well would have started there first and then got on to the university. But the purpose that HCC has served is that it has presented the two most important things that I think are necessary for higher education, and that is access and affordability. It provided it then, and it's providing it now. When we opened in 1968, the tuition was $7 a credit hour. Okay, now it's $104, something like that, so it's increased, but it's still very affordable. Accessibility, as I said before, I didn't have to leave town. My parents knew where I was, so I could have gone to HCC had it been opened. The access right now for students, not just in the Latin community, but all students, the fact that we have 5 centers, 5 campuses with their own presidents and administrations means that every community, be it South County or Ybor, or Dale Mabry, or Brandon, or who am I leaving out? Plant City, sorry. They have within their community an institution that they can very easily get transportation to, go work a full day of work, and then actually afterwards be able to take a class. My most popular classes were at noontime, believe it or not. I never could get a lunch hour because the 12 o'clock classes were just packed. So that's what we provide, access and affordability. Whether it's a Latin community or it's any community, that's what people are looking for. And a quality education taught by top-notch faculty. I'll never ever let you forget that, because at Hillsborough Community College we have credentialed top-notch faculty. Now I want to get back to the neighborhoods a minute, because I just saw data that said we've got about 50% at each campus that travel to another campus to take at least one course. So they're not so segregated anymore, in that you say, well, this is a Plant City student. Well, the Plant City student might come over to Dale Mabry campus for a health science class. So that transportation problem in Hillsborough County will be the topic of another conversation that we will have. But let's see, how much has it changed? That was your second question, Rodney. It has changed in many ways, and in the most important ways, it has not. We still have top-notch faculty. We still have classes that are capped at 35. Some of them are capped smaller than that, especially in the performing arts and in the health sciences. So a student can come and get an excellent course, an excellent education in an environment where the faculty member knows their face. By the second class, we know all their names. So it's a very personal experience, and it's very high quality. So that part hasn't changed. What has changed, of course, is the technology. The last 10 years of my time at Hillsborough Community College, I taught algebra courses online using software. There was no FaceTime at that time, because that was a while back. And so it was pretty much by telephone or by email or some other means. And if you've ever had to try to type an algebraic equation into an email, you've got another experience coming. So it was very, very challenging. But the technology is definitely what has changed. And I think what we have to do to change with it is to allow time and money to be provided for training for faculty so that they can keep up. Our students come to us with so many skills that many faculty have not yet experienced. So we're learning from them as well. And the last thing I'm going to say is about the coalition that we have with the University of South Florida. Back in 1980, when I was first teaching for HCC, we I don't know if we invented it or we just started using it. It was called cross enrollment, where a student could take courses at USF and HCC, and the state would recognize them as one complete enrollment. So that 9 credit hours at USF plus 3 credit hours at HCC in a college credit course would make them qualify for a full-time enrolled student, which means they could qualify for loans, they could stay on their parents' insurance company, all sorts of important things. That relationship, which I participated in 1980, has become even more so important today. As USF has arrived at the level of preeminence and is being more and more selective of the students that they take, we hope that those B+ students who don't have a good chance of getting into USF are coming to Hillsborough Community College to take advantage of all those wonderful things I just talked about.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So now, it's your turn to ask questions. If you have any questions, we would love to hear them. We've heard quite a bit of history, quite a bit of information, so does anybody have anything that they'd like to either add to what's been said or ask a question? Yes?
Just curious, since you're here, Mr. Sparkman, is it true from your history about the whole debate over whether or not the first campus was going to be in Plant City or in Dale Mabry? I had heard through the grapevine, looking at the histories, that was a huge contention point at one point? I couldn't,
Yeah, I would say probably was, because we had such a strong delegation of people that came and attended the meetings, the planning meetings, and all. At one time, they were asked to leave because I guess they were being pretty persuasive. And of course, with them, we got Dick Elston as from Plant City and former mayor of Plant City as the chairman. It helped our cause too, but I hope there wasn't that much contention. I just think once it was all over with and Dale Mabry came and then Plant City came after, everybody was happy.
It was ambition to be there early for the kids of Plant City is what it was. Not
And they
contention,
stepped up to the
ambition.
plate right away. Because
Immediately.
they said, we have land, we're going to give it to you.
But the bottom line was the recognition of the need for it everywhere throughout Hillsborough County.
Right.
Everybody wanted it.
And I think that's what our people stress. It's not a Tampa, Temple Terrace.
Right.
It's Hillsborough County. It's a whole community of Hillsborough County, all the students of Hillsborough County. And that's what we wanted to do. Spread the wings, and the wings have been spread.
And Ron, to address that to some degree, early on, HCC was in a lot of high schools. And so, as you mentioned previously, that there's Hillsborough, but even that's how UT started. But a little bit of a history of how HCC used area high schools as campuses before they had their own buildings.
Thank you. In 1925, during the boom, before the 1926 bust, we built 2 high schools, $500,000 for Plant, and $1 million for Hillsborough, located closer to where most people really were. So then in 1931 to 1934, the University of Tampa used Hillsborough High in the evening. And then we did in 1968 the same thing, September 30th that night, the 1,625 students. But soon, within a month, we were in Plant City High School. Then we ended up in 3 junior high schools, ended up converting Felton's Grocery, converting, as already said, the Publix in Plant City. So if there was a building loose, it became HCC. If a building turned off the lights, it became HCC. And that was where we went. 6 different schools, Man, Washington, Plant City, Hillsborough, etc., became Hillsborough Community College.
Any other questions you all have? Yeah, right ahead.
Any unique personalities that you can think about over the years you can tell a quick story about?
We almost got away with it.
Almost got away. Lump-a-bum-bum. There were some colorful folks along the way. The Garners and the Scagliones and the Stevensons, and especially Ken and Judy Atwater, are people of note, people of academic excellence. Our Honors Society chief went on to become president of the National Honors College for the entire nation. All the community colleges honor program was our head of the Honors College at HCC, and we've had similar bank and university presidents and distinguished national scholars and distinguished international published scholars, many great works and many great presidencies and leaderships like the National Honor College and others. So we've had enormous personalities throughout. And Hulk Hogan, of course, was a graduate of HCC.
Let me mention one. It's probably unknown. I don't know if he had any direct connection with HCC. But I didn't grow up to Tampa. I came here as a young lawyer who was hired by a law firm in Tampa. And my young bride said she could get a job teaching school here, so away we came. And we've enjoyed living here since then. But I'd been in the Air Force. And after I'd finished my active duty and gone to law school, I continued in the active reserve for a period of time. And I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. I got a telephone call at home from the commander of my squadron who said, be out here at Drew Park in the morning by 7 o'clock. We have some orders. And we were housed in some former military buildings in Drew Park, which has now been overtaken by the campus. They were dilapidated wooden buildings. We would assemble out there every once a month for a weekend and watch old movies and entertain ourselves with war stories. But our commander was a Tampa native named Joseph Thury. He was a retired colonel. He was our 8th ranking ace in World War II. He flew P-51s near the end of the war and was credited with shooting down 28 German aircraft. He was a business owner here. He operated a little laundry. Later, he got talked into going to law school. I don't know if he ever practiced much law, but isn't with us anymore. But he and Air Force Reserve people spent a lot of time out on the site of your Dale Mabry campus at HCC. I remember telling my wife, because I had some understanding of the problem, I said, if we are put into action, load the kids in the car and drive north to Ocala or someplace, because we're a primary target here. We knew that the Soviets had 100 or so mid-range missiles already in Cuba. The thing that brought it to our attention is they hadn't finished constructing their launch sites, and we detected that through aerial observation. So there's a lot of history in that Drew Park area. A lot of ghosts might wander around your campus every now and then, and old Joe might be one of them.
I would say, based on the question you asked, I had the opportunity to be chairman of the District Board of Trustees in 93, 94. And I'll finish this up by being, trying to be, I'm almost always truthful about my feelings and stuff, and even to the paper and stuff like that. But I was chairman during the Andrew Palampus era. But I do have to say that the college had really struggled up to this point. And I do think that Andrew Palampus did a lot to get this thing up and going up on its feet.
True.
And what had happened is, and I was quoted in the paper, and I didn't want to sound negative, and I don't want to say it tonight, sound negative, but I felt like Andrew had overstayed his welcome, or overstayed to where his type of management was still good. We had a lot of problems during that period of time. We had so much concern from the community that we couldn't have our District Board of Trustees meeting at the main office on Davis Island. We had to move it to the Ybor City campus, to that auditorium where it was much larger, so we could house all the TV cameras and all the reporters. And it was very trying and very hard. In fact, when I adjourned the meeting, the Hillsborough Community College security would escort me to my car, and I would get in my car and go home. And so, but I affectionately say to you that even I say he overstayed his welcome, or maybe the true word is his management. But that was some very trying times, and our board went through a lot, as our community went through a lot. And then Dr. Stevens came in and smoothed the waves, and we were glad to get her in position to take the college to the next level, and that's what happened. So that was some of the controversy that I think transpired, but it all turned to the good.
Three of our national models, real quick, were that we got a $1 million grant and were named as the #1 junior college in America in environmental sensitivity to energy, resilience, and sustainability with respect to our energy and our construction. And that was numero uno in the entire nation of all of the junior college systems. And secondly, we got about a $6 million federal grant, very competitive all over the country, for our Hispanic-related junior college education. And Black, Brown, and College Bound is one of the national models. It is still viewed by many in the country as the best of an effort to make sure that our diversity has probably distinguished us among educational institutions all over the country. And I've seen years where as many as 66% of our folks went on to a four-year college, as far as our being a launching pad and an opportunity for them they would not have had. So I think those are just a couple of our many distinctions.
And of course, the underlying theme through all that, I can't sit here quietly and not say that the underlying stability that was provided in the classrooms, in the programs, the students kept coming, the teachers kept teaching, and degrees continued to be granted. We continued to be one of the top graduating, top of the list in graduates and certificate granting institutions. So there was stability, but we did, I would have to agree with you that that style of management ran its course, and we were all very happy when Dr. Stevenson arrived to provide that stability, and she did it for a good 12 years, I believe, so we're very happy
God bless her.
that she was
Bless
here.
her soul.
Memory.
Yeah, may she rest in peace.
Passed away, what, about 4 months ago, 5 months ago?
Rodney,
Yes.
I see a lot of people in the audience have a question that they haven't asked. That may not be students or faculty members at HCC, and that is, what can I do to help move HCC forward?
Great question.
I'll give you a quick answer and a suggestion that I know several in the audience have followed. I talked with Steve Shear just before the meeting. I had known his father, just had an opportunity to meet him. When I finished my legislative service, I discovered I had $10,000 left in my campaign account. I'd not had any opposition the last 3 terms, so I hadn't used it, and many of the people who donated were dead or gone, and I didn't know how I could refund it. So the Attorney General told me it was my money, I could do what I wanted to do with it. So I decided to make charitable contributions, and I contributed $1,000 to the HCC Foundation. I don't know what it's grown to today, but as inexpensive as HCC is, there's still students that need financial help. There's still things that the college needs that are not covered entirely by state funds. So one way you can help, other than cheering folks on, is occasionally write a little check and send it to Steve for the HCC Foundation.
Amen.
Great way to react.
He's absolutely. I don't know if we can say anything any better than that. Thank you all so much for your service here on the panel, and thank you all so much for coming. And let's hope for another 15 successful years at HCC.
So this is what my girlfriend was.
Thank you.